"You don't sit in my courthouse until I tell you where to sit." The hand came fast, open palm against the center of his chest, shoving him backward into the gallery bench, hard enough to rattle the wooden frame against the marble floor. The sound echoed through the empty courtroom like a gunshot. A bailiff, 6'4", 260 pounds, neck thick as a fire hydrant, stood over a black man in a plain gray polo shirt who had done nothing except walk through an unlocked door and choose a seat in a public courtroom in Brecker County, Georgia. The bailiff had just committed assault, and the man he assaulted was the highest-ranking FBI agent in the state. He didn't know that yet. Nobody in this courthouse did. The man in the polo straightened himself on the bench without rubbing his chest. His breathing didn't change. His hands stayed at his sides, open, visible, deliberately non-threatening. He looked at the bailiff the way someone examines a crack in a foundation wall, not with anger, but with the focused attention of a person who understands structural failure. "I have a hearing notice." His voice carried no inflection, no fear, no challenge, just information. "Probate matter, Odom Estate, docket number 24-PB-0417. The bailiff, badge reading G. Lunsford, didn't move. His feet stayed planted, blocking the aisle between the gallery and the bar. Behind him, the courtroom stretched toward the judge's bench, empty and silent, morning light cutting through tall windows that hadn't been cleaned in months. "Hearing notice doesn't mean you walk in here like you own the place." Lunsford's jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. "You wait outside. I come get you when you're called." The man reached into his briefcase, slowly, visibly, and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He read from it, voice clear enough for the court reporter's microphone to catch every syllable, even though no reporter was present yet. "Brecker County Courthouse Public Access Policy, posted in the main lobby. Quote, all courtrooms are open to the public during scheduled proceedings unless sealed by judicial order. Members of the public may be seated in the gallery at any time the courtroom is unlocked." End quote. Georgia Code section, "Muilam get noi sau get noitam." Lunsford stared at him. The paper. Back at him. Then he walked to the courtroom door, stepped through it, and pulled it shut behind him. 2 clicks. The lock engaging from the outside. Then silence. If you've ever walked into a room where you had every right to be, and been treated like you didn't belong, then this story was made for you. Subscribe now, because what happens next in this courtroom will stay with you long after it's over. The man sat in the locked courtroom for 11 minutes before the door opened again. He didn't pound on it, didn't call out, didn't try the handle. He sat with his back straight, hands resting on the briefcase in his lap, and counted the ceiling tiles. 47. The same number as the properties listed in a federal case file locked in a floor safe 212 miles north, in an office on the 16th floor of the Richard B. Russell Federal Building in downtown Atlanta. His name was Marshall Odom. He was 44 years old. He had driven 91 miles that morning from a Holiday Inn in Decatur to attend a probate hearing for the estate of his mother, Laureen Beatrice Odom, who had died 6 weeks earlier at the age of 78 from congestive heart failure in the same 4-bedroom house on Birch Lane that she had owned for 41 years. That was the version of Marshall Odom that Brecker County was meant to see. A grieving son. A man in a polo shirt handling his mother's paperwork. Ordinary. Forgettable. Exactly the kind of person a corrupt system felt comfortable exploiting. 3 weeks earlier, he had walked into this same courthouse for the first time. The drive from Atlanta took an hour and 40 minutes on back roads that cut through pine forests and past abandoned textile mills, through towns where the population signs hadn't been updated since the 90s and probably overstated even then. Brecker County sat in the geographic center of a region. The Bureau's Public Corruption Unit had been watching for 14 months. 3 rural counties where elderly black landowners were losing their properties through probate proceedings at a rate that couldn't be explained by demographics, economics, or coincidence. 14 times the rate of white property owners in the same courts. 11.4 times more likely to have a guardian appointed over their estates. 7.2 times more likely to be held in contempt during proceedings. The numbers were in the case file. The case file was in the safe. The safe was in Marshal Odom's office. Because Marshal Odom was the special agent in charge of the FBI Atlanta Field Office's Public Corruption Unit, and for the past 14 months, he had been building a federal racketeering case against the woman whose name was engraved on the brass plate bolted to the bench at the front of this courtroom. Judge Cordelia Voss, elected circuit judge, 16 years on the bench. Uncontested in 3 consecutive elections because nobody in Brecker County wanted to run against her, and the few who considered it received visits from her bailiff or her favorite deputy that convinced them the filing fee wasn't worth the trouble. Marshall had never intended to enter the case himself. Field agents handled undercover work. But 6 weeks ago, his mother died. And her house, the house on Birch Lane, 2 acres, clean title, no liens, no debts, sat in the exact jurisdiction where Voss operated. The same jurisdiction where 17 other properties belonging to elderly black landowners had been seized through probate proceedings, undervalued by a friendly assessor, and sold to a shell company at 40 to 60 cents on the dollar. His mother's death was real. His grief was real. The probate filing was real. The opportunity was something the Bureau's operational planners couldn't have manufactured in a decade of trying. Marshall had filed the paperwork himself. Pro se, no attorney. A black man, alone, navigating a system designed to confuse and exploit people exactly like him, or like the version of him that Brecker County was allowed to see. The first visit had been reconnaissance. He wanted to see the courthouse, meet the staff, understand the rhythms, how long the clerk took to process filings, where the cameras were, where they weren't, which doors locked from the inside and which locked from the outside. He'd learned all of that. And he'd learned something else. The clerk's office smelled like burnt coffee and photocopier toner. A woman sat behind a plexiglass partition that had been installed during the pandemic and never removed, Tessa Ridley, according to the nameplate on the counter. Early 50s. Wire-rimmed glasses on a beaded chain. Fingernails painted a coral that clashed with the institutional beige of everything else in the building. Marshall slid his probate petition through the slot at the bottom of the partition. 23 pages. Certified copy of the death certificate. Certified copy of the will. Title search from a firm in Atlanta. Filing fee in a cashier's check. He'd called ahead to confirm the amount. Tessa picked up the petition, held it like a soiled napkin, and began flipping pages with the urgency of someone who would rather be doing literally anything else. You the son? Yes, ma'am. You the only heir? Yes, ma'am. It's specified in the will. She turned another page, stopped, read something, looked up at him over the glasses. This property, Multingen Mutrum Bamuitam Birch Lane, 2 acres? 2.3. Recently reassessed. Marshall waited. He already knew the reassessment number. He'd pulled it from public records 2 months ago, before his mother's death, as part of the federal investigation. He knew it had jumped from $94,000 to $187,000 in a single year. He knew the assessor who signed it, Frank Dunlap. He knew Dunlap's brother lived next door to his mother's house. He knew all of this because, knowing it was his job, but in this clerk's office, he was just a son, and sons don't typically arrive with encyclopedic knowledge of county tax assessments. What's the assessed value relevant to? He asked. Simple question. The kind a careful layperson would ask. Tessa didn't answer. She set the petition down, picked up the phone, and dialed a 3-digit extension, waited, spoke quietly. Marshall caught Odom and Birch Lane and 2 acres before she cupped her hand over the receiver. She hung up, looked at him, smiled, the kind of smile that costs nothing and means less. We'll get this filed. Processing takes 5 to 7 business days. The posted timeline on your website says 24 to 48 hours for standard probate filings. The smile tightened. We're backed up. Marshall nodded, took the receipt she printed, noting it didn't include a filing timestamp, just a date. Walked out of the clerk's office, through the marble lobby where the courthouse's original brass fixtures had been replaced with fluorescent panels that gave everyone's skin the color of old paper, and out the front door into watery March sunshine. He sat in his rental car, pulled out a leather notebook with numbered pages, wrote with a fine-point black pen that didn't smear. March Bon. Chinzhou Bei Futsang. Probate petition filed. Clerk. Tessa Ridley. Phone call placed during processing. 3-digit extension, internal. Mentioned property address and acreage. Receipt issued without timestamp. Website states 24 to 48-hour processing. Clerk claims backed up. Filing fee, $285. Cashier's check number, Bon Bon Bay Mode. He closed the notebook, started the car, pulled out of the parking lot, front-facing, the way he always parked, ready for a clean exit, and drove past his mother's house, on the way back to the highway. He didn't stop, but he saw the truck in the driveway. White panel van, no windows in the back, logo on the side, Dunlap Property Services. A man in khakis was walking the perimeter of the house with a clipboard and a measuring wheel. Marshall noted the license plate. Continued driving. Did not approach. At the Holiday Inn that evening, his room looked like it belonged to someone with a military background, which it did, though not in the way most people assumed. Clothes folded with geometric precision. Toiletries arranged in a line on the bathroom counter. Razor, toothbrush, comb, travel-size deodorant, in the same order they'd been in for 22 years, since Quantico. Bed made with hospital corners before housekeeping arrived. Shoes aligned at the foot of the dresser. He changed the combination on his briefcase, different hotel, different code, every night, and opened his laptop, encrypted, bureau-issued, running on a VPN that routed through 3 different nodes before reaching the Atlanta field office's secure server. He typed a brief operational update. Initial contact with Brecker County Clerk's office complete. Filing processed. Clerk placed internal call during processing, likely to Chambers or to Holloway. Dunlap Property Services vehicle observed at subject property within hours of filing. Consistent with pattern, estate filing triggers, property assessment review. Triggers, GAL appointment triggers, receivership motion triggers, forced sale. Timeline observation. Petition filed Chin, Zhou Futsang. Assessor vehicle at property by approximately Haizhou, Muilam Fuchiu. 5-hour response. Faster than any previous documented case. He closed the laptop, made coffee from the room's single-serve machine, drank it standing by the window, looking at a parking lot. His mother had been dead for 12 days. He missed her the way you miss gravity, when it suddenly changes, not with a single sharp sensation, but with a continuous, disorienting awareness that something fundamental has shifted and will never shift back. Lorene Odom had raised him alone in that house on Birch Lane, had worked as a school librarian for 34 years, had paid off her mortgage in Haingin Kung Trum Le Mot, and kept the receipt in a fireproof box under her bed next to her marriage certificate, his birth certificate, and a photo of his father in his army dress uniform, a man Marshall had never met, killed in a training accident at Fort Stewart 3 months before Marshall was born. She had never asked Marshall what he did for a living. Not exactly. She knew he worked for the government. She knew he carried a badge. She knew he traveled frequently and couldn't always say where he'd been. She had stopped asking specifics sometime around his 30th birthday, not because she wasn't curious, but because she understood that some questions were kinder, left unasked. The last thing she said to him 4 days before she died was, "Don't let them take the house, baby. It's the only thing I own that nobody ever gave me." Nobody was going to take the house, but Marshall needed them to try. 1 week after filing, Marshall drove back to Brecker County. The petition should have been processed. He should have received a hearing date. Instead, he received Tessa Ridley's coral fingernails tapping on the plexiglass partition and a look of exaggerated sympathy. "Mr. Odom, I'm so sorry. We can't seem to locate your filing." Marshall stood at the counter, breathed, let 2 seconds pass, not for his benefit, but for the benefit of anyone reviewing security footage later. "I have a receipt." "Oh, I'm sure you do, but the receipt just means you paid the fee. The filing itself, the actual petition, I'm showing no record in our system." "I watched you scan the first page. The scanner was a Canon image runner, serial number visible on the front panel. The green light blinked twice when the scan completed." Tessa's fingers stopped tapping. "I'll need to refile," Marshall said. "I brought a second copy." He produced it from his briefcase. 23 pages, identical to the first, pre-made, as if he'd expected exactly this. Because he had. Tessa processed the second filing in silence. This time she printed a receipt with a timestamp. March moi mot, moi jo moi bon foot sang. 7 days after the first filing. Marshall noted the gap. Filing fee again? She asked. I already paid. For the first filing. This is a new filing. This is the same petition, same estate, same decedent. You lost the original. I didn't lose anything, Mr. Odom. Our system shows no prior filing. $285. Marshall paid. Cashier's check number, bon bon tam tam. He photographed the receipt, front and back, before Tessa could slide the partition shut. One more thing, he said. There's a man listed on my second receipt as guardian ad litem, Pierce Halloway. I didn't request a guardian ad litem. There's no minor or incapacitated party in this estate. Tessa's expression achieved a new level of practiced blankness. Guardian ad litem appointments are at the judge's discretion, standard procedure for estates above certain assessed values. What value threshold? You'd have to ask Judge Voss. I'm asking you. You referenced a standard procedure. What's the threshold? I'm a clerk, Mr. Odom, not a lawyer. The partition slid shut. Not all the way. Just enough to signal the conversation was over while maintaining the appearance of remaining open. A bureaucratic half-measure that said everything about how this office operated. Marshall walked out, sat in his car. 11 minutes of writing. March 11, 10 phút sang, second filing processed. $285 additional fee charged. $570 total for a single probate petition. Original filing lost. No record in system despite scanned receipt. Tessa Ridley, Gal Pierce Halloway, appointed pre-petition. Appointment order likely predates system entry. Will verify via court records request. He drove past the house on Birch Lane again. The Dunlap Property Services truck was gone, but the measuring stakes were still in the yard. Small orange flags on wire posts, the kind surveyors use to mark boundary lines. Lorene Odom's property had been surveyed without her son's knowledge or consent. Marshall photographed the stakes from the road, did not stop, did not enter the property. At the diner on Route Muy Bay, the only restaurant in Brecker County that wasn't a gas station or a Waffle House, he ordered coffee and a grilled cheese and made small talk with the waitress about the weather and the high school basketball team. He did not ask about the courthouse, did not ask about Judge Voss, did not ask about property sales or tax assessments or guardians ad litem. He tipped 40% and left. The waitress remembered a polite man who seemed tired. That was all. That night, at the Holiday Inn, he ate a granola bar for dinner and read the full text of Georgia Code section, Hai Mui Chin Get Noi Hai Get Noi Ba, on his phone. Not because he needed to, but because the version of Marshall Odom that existed in Brecker County would need to cite it from memory in a courtroom, and that version couldn't afford to look like someone who'd studied the statute before arriving. He needed to sound like a careful layperson who'd done his homework after being surprised by the appointment, not an FBI agent who'd known the statute for 14 months. Performance was exhausting. Grief made it worse. The combination left him sitting on a hotel bed at 11 p.m., staring at a wall, trying to remember the last time he'd slept more than 4 hours in a row. His phone buzzed. Encrypted message from his ASAC. Assistant Special Agent in Charge, Diane Kimura, running the operation from Atlanta. Halloway appointment order obtained via sealed subpoena. Dated March Sow. 2 days after your first filing. 5 days before system entry. Pattern confirmed. Filing triggers appointment before petition is officially logged. Wiretap active. Teget Noiba authorized by Chief Judge, NDGA. Be careful. Marshall deleted the message, set his alarm, slept with the briefcase combination locked beside his pillow. The probate hearing was scheduled for Thursday, March Hai Mui, at 9 a.m. Marshall arrived at 8:32, parked front-facing, walked through the metal detector in the courthouse lobby. No weapon, no badge, nothing in his pockets except a wallet, keys, and a phone. His notebook was in the briefcase. The courtroom, the same one Lunsford had locked him in, was open this time. People filtered in. A couple with a real estate dispute, a woman seeking a name change, a man in a rumpled suit who looked like a public defender and smelled like he'd been up since 4 a.m. Marshall sat in the third row of the gallery, center aisle. Clear sightline to the bench, the witness box, the court reporter's station. He chose the seat for the same reason he parked front-facing: operational habit, best view, fastest exit. At 9:03, a side door opened and Judge Cordelia Voss entered the courtroom. She was 58, silver hair cut in a precise bob, reading glasses on a chain around her neck, black robe that she wore like armor, not judicial modesty, but institutional power made visible. Her face had the angular structure of someone who had been considered handsome in her 30s and had since traded beauty for authority without missing it. She moved to the bench with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had sat in that chair 6,000 times and intended to sit in it 6,000 more. The nameplate, Judge Cordelia Voss, Brecker County Circuit Court, was brass, bolted down, permanent. Not temporary, not rotating. This courtroom belonged to her the way a spider's web belongs to the spider. Be seated. Her voice was a contralto that filled the room without amplification. Not loud, just everywhere. The docket moved quickly. The real estate dispute was continued. The name change was granted. The public defender plea bargained a misdemeanor down to a fine. Voss dispensed with each matter in minutes. Brisk, efficient, impatient with anyone who spoke too long or cited too much. Then Tessa Ridley, seated at the clerk's station below the bench, called the next case. In the matter of the estate of Laureen Beatrice Odom, docket number 24-PB-0417, Mr. Marshall Odom, appearing pro se. Marshall stood, walked to the podium, set his briefcase on the floor beside him. Mr. Odom? Voss looked at him over her reading glasses. The look lasted 3 seconds longer than necessary, the kind of pause that established who controlled the room and who was being allowed to occupy it temporarily. You're here regarding the probate of your mother's estate. Yes, Your Honor. I see a guardian ad litem has been appointed. Mr. Halloway. A man stood from the first row. Pierce Halloway, mid-60s, charcoal suit that fit too well for a court-appointed position that paid $300. Salt and pepper beard trimmed with surgical precision. Leather portfolio under his arm. He moved to the second podium, the one reserved for opposing counsel, and opened the portfolio with the unhurried confidence of someone who already knew the outcome. Your Honor, I've completed a preliminary review of the estate. I have some concerns. Marshall turned toward Halloway. Your Honor, before Mr. Halloway presents his concerns, I'd like to address the appointment itself. Georgia Code Section, Heimuchinget Neuhiget Neuba limits guardian ad litem, appointments to cases involving minors or legally incapacitated persons. My mother's will names me as sole heir. I'm 44 years old and legally competent. There is no statutory basis for this appointment. The courtroom went quiet. Not the dramatic silence of a movie, the uncomfortable quiet of a room where someone had said something technically correct that nobody wanted to acknowledge. Voss removed her reading glasses, set them on the bench. The gesture was deliberate, a judge removing the apparatus of careful reading to signal that what came next would not require careful consideration. Mr. Odom, this court has broad discretion in probate matters. Guardian ad litem appointments are standard procedure for estates exceeding an assessed value of $150,000. With respect, Your Honor, there is no provision in Georgia Probate Code establishing a value threshold for mandatory GAL appointments. The statute is specific: minors or incapacitated persons. I will determine what's relevant in my courtroom, Mr. Odom. The emphasis landed like a slap, not a response to his argument, a reminder of geography. Her courtroom, her rules, her discretion. The legal merits of his objection were irrelevant because the power to decide what was relevant belonged to the person sitting 3 feet higher than everyone else. Halloway opened his portfolio. Your Honor, my preliminary assessment raises several concerns. The property at Motngin Motchum Bamuitam Birch Lane was recently reassessed at $187,000. Given the original purchase price in Motngin Chintrum Tam Muiba of $12,000, there may be irregularities in the title history that warrant further review. Marshall's jaw tightened by a fraction of a millimeter, the only visible reaction. Your Honor, the purchase price 41 years ago has no bearing on current probate proceedings. The title is clean. I have a certified title search from Mr. Odom. Voss held up one hand. I'm not interested in documents you've brought from outside this jurisdiction. Mr. Halloway's assessment recommends placing the estate in receivership to protect against waste. I'm inclined to agree. Receivership requires evidence of waste or mismanagement, Your Honor. The property has been maintained continuously for 4 decades. Property taxes are current through last January. Mr. Halloway? Halloway turned a page in his portfolio. Your Honor, the estate has been without formal administration since the decedent's passing. 6 weeks without court oversight creates risk. I recommend appointment of a receiver to manage the property pending resolution of the probate petition. I am the estate administrator, Marshall said. The will names me executor. The filing requests confirmation of that appointment. Voss looked at Tessa. Tessa shook her head. The slightest motion, almost invisible, but Marshall saw it. A signal, a coordination. The filing in question is incomplete, Voss said. Our records show the petition was received on March Moimot, but several supporting documents are missing. Until the petition is properly completed, the court cannot confirm an executor appointment. I filed a complete petition on March 4th. It was lost by the clerk's office. I refiled on March 11th with identical documents. Both filings were complete. Our records show what they show, Mr. Odom. Voss picked up her reading glasses, put them back on. The deliberate reversal, the apparatus of careful reading reinstated now that the decision had already been made. I'm granting Mr. Halloway's request for receivership pending completion of the estate filing. The receiver will have authority to manage the property, accept or reject offers. Offers? Marshall's voice stayed level, but the word came quickly. Your Honor, the estate is not for sale. The property is my family home. No one said anything about selling, Mr. Odom. Receivership is a protective measure. She turned to the court reporter. Let the record reflect the court has appointed Pierce Halloway as guardian ad litem and authorized receivership of the Odom estate pending completed probate filing. The petitioner is instructed not to remove any items from the property pending court review. Your Honor, I'm requesting a continuance to retain counsel. Denied. This court doesn't delay proceedings for parties who chose to appear pro se. If you wanted a lawyer, Mr. Odom, you should have hired one before today. She looked at Tessa. Next case. Marshall stood at the podium for 3 seconds after being dismissed. He wasn't processing shock. He was committing the proceeding to memory. Every word, every gesture. The headshake from Tessa, the pre-prepared portfolio from Halloway, the speed with which receivership was granted. A remedy that typically required motion practice, briefing, and evidentiary hearing compressed into 4 minutes of oral argument, with no opposing evidence considered. He picked up his briefcase, walked out of the courtroom. Past Lunsford, who stood at the door with his arms crossed, watching Marshall leave with an expression that combined professional satisfaction with something more personal. Have a good day now, Lunsford said. Marshall didn't respond, didn't look at him. Walked through the lobby, through the metal detector, into the parking lot. In his car, he sat for 11 minutes, wrote everything down, timestamps, quotes, the headshake, the portfolio that was already open to the right page, the receivership granted without motion. At the bottom of the page, he wrote, pattern confirmed live, faster than anticipated, moving to active surveillance phase. He started the car, drove past his mother's house. This time, there was a new sign in the yard, a metal stake with a laminated notice. Property under court supervision. Brecker County Circuit Court. Unauthorized entry prohibited. The sign had been printed before the hearing. The lamination was professional, not courthouse copy machine quality. Someone had ordered it in advance. Marshall photographed it from the road, noted the time, 10:23 a.m. The hearing had ended at 9:41. 42 minutes to produce and install a sign that would have taken a day to print and laminate, unless it was already waiting. He kept driving. The photograph was already uploading to the Bureau's secure evidence server through his phone's encrypted connection. Tagged, time-stamped, geolocated. One more piece in a case file that was growing heavier every day. If someone you love has ever been targeted by a system designed to take what's theirs, stay with this story. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And make sure you're subscribed, because this fight is just getting started. 4 days later, Monday, March 24th. Marshall returned to the Brecker County Courthouse for a hearing he hadn't requested, a status conference on the receivership that Holloway had apparently scheduled through the clerk's office without notifying him. He'd found out through the court's online docket, which he checked every morning at 6 a.m. from his hotel room. He arrived at 8:45. The courtroom was locked. Tessa emerged from her office at 8:53. "Oh, Mr. Odom, the hearing was moved to Tuesday. The docket shows today. It was updated Friday afternoon. You would have been notified by mail." "I haven't received any mail." "Well, that's the postal service for you." She smiled. The coral fingernails caught the fluorescent light. Marshall had driven 91 miles. He stood in the marble lobby, briefcase in hand, and said nothing for 5 seconds. Then, "I'll be here tomorrow." Bright and early, 9 a.m. She turned back toward her office, then stopped. Over her shoulder, "Oh, and Mr. Odom? Some people just can't accept when a judge makes a ruling. They think they know better than everyone, makes the process so much harder than it needs to be." She disappeared into her office. The door clicked shut. Marshall stood in the lobby for another minute. Alone. The building was nearly empty. Brecker County's courthouse saw maybe 15 cases a week, most of them traffic violations and small claims. The marble floor amplified his breathing. The fluorescent lights buzzed. He walked out, sat in his car, wrote, "March hai muy bon, tamzo num muy ba fut sang." Hearing vacated without notice. Tessa Ridley, informed verbally upon arrival. No written notice received. Docket updated, Friday afternoon per clerk. Will verify digital timestamp. Clerk made unsolicited editorial comment challenging judicial rulings, consistent with coordinated messaging pattern. Tuesday, March 25th, 9 a.m. Marshall arrived. The courtroom was open. Lunsford was at the door. They did not speak. Marshall sat in the third row. Same seat, or tried to. Lunsford followed him down the aisle, tapped the pew behind him. "Not that row, move back. This is a public gallery. Seating is unrestricted. New policy, first 3 rows are reserved." Marshall looked at the rows. No signs, no placards, no reservation markers, just empty wooden benches stretching from the bar to the back wall. Reserved for whom? Court personnel and invited parties. Lunsford crossed his arms. The posture created a wall of forearm and chest that communicated the conversation was over, regardless of whether words continued. Marshall picked up his briefcase and moved to the 5th row. He could have argued, could have cited the public access policy again. But the fight over a seat was a fight over nothing. The real conflict was happening in the documents, in the docket, in the phone calls the FBI's wiretap was capturing every morning before the courthouse lights came on. Surrendering 2 rows of wooden bench cost him nothing. Making Lunsford feel powerful cost him less. From the 5th row, his sight line to the bench was partially obstructed by a support column. He shifted 1 seat to the left. Clear view restored. Lunsford watched, but didn't comment. At 8:57, Tessa emerged from the clerk's station and walked to the gallery with a clipboard. She stopped at Marshall's row. "Mr. Odom, I need you to sign a courtroom conduct agreement." "A what?" "Standard form. All pro se litigants are required to sign before appearing. It outlines expectations for behavior, decorum, and compliance with judicial authority." She held out the clipboard. Marshall read the document. 1 page. No header. No case number. No court seal. No statutory citation. A list of 7 bullet points that included, "The undersigned agrees to comply with all orders of the presiding judge without objection or delay," and "The undersigned waives the right to appeal procedural decisions made during the proceeding." "I'm not signing this." "Then you can't appear today." There is no legal basis for requiring a litigant to waive appellate rights as a condition of appearing in court. This document is invalid on its face." Tessa's expression didn't change, but her voice dropped to a volume meant only for Marshall and the column next to him. "Mr. Odom, I'm going to be honest with you. I've been clerking in this court for 22 years. I've seen a lot of people come in here thinking they're smarter than the system. Every single one of them left with less than they came in with. Every single one." She pulled the clipboard back, turned, walked to the clerk's station. The interaction was over, the form was gone, but the message, delivered in a whisper with the weight of 22 years behind it, hung in the air like an echo that refused to fade. The hearing this time included a new participant. Pierce Halloway sat at the respondent's table with a stack of documents that hadn't existed 3 days ago. He'd prepared a motion, 22 pages, bound, with exhibit tabs, titled "Motion to Compel Financial Disclosure by a State Petitioner." Marshall received his copy as the hearing began. He had not been served in advance. The motion requested complete financial disclosure from Marshall personally: bank statements, tax returns, employment records, investment accounts, for a simple probate case involving a house with a clear title and a 2-page will. Halloway's argument was smooth, practiced, devoid of urgency. "Your Honor, to properly assess the estate and protect against potential conflicts of interest, the court needs a complete picture of the petitioner's financial circumstances. This is standard due diligence." Marshall read the motion while Halloway spoke, page by page, not skimming, reading, absorbing each paragraph, each citation, and finding on page 14 the reference that confirmed what he already suspected. "Your Honor," he said when Halloway finished, "this motion cites Brecker County probate rule Muy Bon Chambé as authority for compelling personal financial disclosure from an estate petitioner. I've reviewed the Brecker County probate rules, all 13 of them, posted on the county's official website. There is no rule Muy Bon Chambé." Halloway's pen stopped moving. "The motion cites a rule that doesn't exist," Marshall continued. "I'll note this for the record, and ask the court to deny the motion on that basis alone, without reaching the broader question of whether personal financial disclosure is appropriate in a straightforward probate proceeding. Which it isn't, under Georgia Uniform Probate Code section Namui Bagat Noi Saugat Noi Haimui Mot." Voss didn't look at Halloway. She looked at Marshall. The gaze held for 4 seconds. Not the evaluative pause from last week, but something sharper, something recalibrating. "Mr. Halloway, is the cited rule accurate?" "Your Honor, I believe the rule may have been recently updated. I'll verify and refile if necessary." "The motion is taken under advisement." Voss set the document aside. "Moving on. Mr. Odom, there's a second matter on today's docket." Marshall hadn't seen a second matter listed. He looked at his printout of the morning's docket. One case, Odom Estate. "The court has been informed of potential estate fraud," Voss said. "A review of the property's title history has raised questions about the original acquisition." "Your Honor, what questions?" "The title search I submitted shows a clean chain of ownership dating to 1993. The title search you submitted is from a firm in Atlanta. This court relies on local records. Mr. Halloway has prepared a preliminary analysis." Halloway produced another document, a single page this time. "Your Honor, the purchase price of $12,000 in Motngin Chintrum Tam Muiba for a property, now assessed at $187,000, represents a 1,500% increase. While appreciation is expected, this rate significantly exceeds regional averages. Combined with the fact that the original seller, a Mr. Walter Crenshaw, died in Motngin Chintrum Chinmui Mot without leaving records of the transaction, there are questions about whether the deed was properly executed." Marshall felt the architecture of the trap closing around him. Each piece: the reassessment, the gal, the receivership, the fabricated rule, the fraud allegation, locked into the next like gears in a machine that had been running long before his mother died. Long before he walked into this courthouse, this machine had consumed 17 other properties, 17 other families. It ran on the presumption that people like him, black, unrepresented, grieving, would exhaust their resources fighting each individual gear without ever understanding they were facing a machine. "For the record," Marshall said, his voice carrying no more emotion than a metronome, "I object to the introduction of fraud allegations without prior notice, without supporting affidavit, and without opportunity to prepare a response. This violates due process under the 14th Amendment and Georgia Code Section Chingach Noi Muy Motgach Noi Muy Lum, which requires 10 days' notice before hearing on any motion." "Noted," Voss said. "I'm ordering the original deed surrendered to the court for authentication. Mr. Odom, you'll produce the deed at the next hearing." "The deed is in my mother's house, which I am currently prohibited from entering under this court's own order." Silence. Voss's jaw shifted. She had trapped herself. The no-entry order prevented Marshall from accessing the document she was ordering him to produce. "Deputy Colter will accompany you to retrieve the deed," she said, recovering. "Today, before 5 p.m. I'd prefer to retrieve the deed alone. It's my property." "It's the estate's property, Mr. Odom, and the estate is under receivership. Deputy Colter will accompany you. That's final." Marshall nodded once, picked up his briefcase, walked out. In the parking lot, Deputy Wade Colter was leaning against a sheriff's cruiser, arms crossed, as if he'd been waiting. Thick forearms, buzz cut, sunglasses that he didn't remove despite the overcast sky. The posture of a man who occupied space the way a roadblock occupies a highway, not because he needed to be there, but because he could. "Mr. Odom, I'm your escort." Colter pushed off the cruiser. "You drive, I follow. Straight to the property, straight to the deed, straight back to the courthouse. No stops." "Understood." "Friendly advice." Colter stepped closer. Close enough that Marshall could smell the chewing tobacco. "Judge Voss doesn't like people who make her look bad. Might want to take whatever deal Holloway offers. Save yourself a lot of headaches." Marshall looked at Colter, said one word. "Appreciated." No fear, no anger, no information, just the acknowledgement of a statement received and filed. Colter didn't like it. The response was supposed to produce something, a flinch, a negotiation, a question that would signal how much pressure was needed to produce compliance. Appreciated gave him nothing. He stepped closer, close enough that his chest nearly touched Marshall's shoulder. "You don't hear so good, do you?" Not a question. A statement delivered at a volume designed for the parking lot and no one else. People come into this county thinking they know how things work. They don't. The judge has been here 16 years. You've been here 16 days. Do the math. Marshall held his car keys in his left hand. Didn't step back. Didn't step forward. Occupied exactly the same space he'd been occupying when Colter started talking. "I can do math," Marshall said. "Is there anything else?" Colter's jaw shifted. He reached out and flicked the collar of Marshall's polo. A casual, dismissive gesture, the kind of touch that communicates contempt without rising to the level of assault. The kind of touch that says, "I can reach you whenever I want." "Nice shirt," Colter said. "You should wear a tie next time you come to court. Show some respect." Marshall said nothing, got into his car. They drove to the house, Marshall in his rental, Colter in the cruiser, tailgating at 40 feet on a 2-lane road, close enough that his grill filled Marshall's rearview mirror. 1138 Birch Lane, the house where Laureen Odom had lived for 41 years. White clapboard, green shutters she'd repainted every spring, a porch swing where she'd read library books in the evenings, even after she retired, borrowing from the same library where she'd worked, because old habits are the last things to die. The court supervision sign was still in the yard. The measuring stakes were gone, removed after they'd served their purpose. Marshall unlocked the front door, stepped inside. The house smelled like her, lavender and old paper, and the specific warmth of a space that had been loved by the same person for 4 decades. Colter followed him in. Didn't remove his boots. Walked through the living room with the deliberate heaviness of a man marking territory, his footsteps leaving mud prints on the carpet Laureen had vacuumed every Saturday morning for as long as Marshall could remember. Colter stopped at the mantel, picked up a framed photograph. Laureen at her retirement party, surrounded by children from the school, cake with 34 candles arranged in the shape of an open book. He turned the frame over in his hands, studying it the way someone studies an object at a yard sale. "Nice house," he said. "Good bones. Lot of land for one person." Marshall watched him handle his mother's photograph. Something in his chest compressed. Not anger exactly, but a cold awareness that this man was touching his mother's life with the same hands that would plant false evidence in his briefcase 2 days from now. He said nothing, filed the observation. Colter set the photograph back on the mantel, face down. "The deed," he said. "Let's get it." Marshall walked past him toward the bedroom. Colter followed too closely. Close enough that when Marshall turned the corner into the hallway, Colter's shoulder clipped his back. Not hard, not accidental. A shoulder check delivered with the casual imprecision of a man who had learned that small physical contacts, individually insufficient for complaint, accumulated into a constant atmosphere of threat. In the bedroom, Marshall knelt beside the bed. Colter stood in the doorway, filling it. His hand rested on his belt, not on his weapon, but near it. The positioning was deliberate, a reminder of differential power. Marshall pulled the fireproof box from under the bed. The combination lock opened on the first try. Inside, marriage certificate, his birth certificate, his father's Army photo. A young man in dress greens, 23 years old, 3 months from a death that would leave his son fatherless before birth. Property tax receipts filed every January for 4 decades. And the deed, original, signed, notarized, dated September, Muy bon, Mot ngin chin trum tam muy ba. What else is in there? Colter leaned forward, craning his neck to see into the box. Personal family documents, not relevant to the court's order. Everything in this house is relevant. The judge said, "The judge ordered me to retrieve the deed. I'm retrieving the deed." Marshall removed only the document, closed the box, slid it back under the bed. His movements were precise, unhurried, and carried the particular authority of a man who had decided where the boundary was and would not be moved from it. Colter stepped into the room, grabbed the box from under the bed, pulled it out. "I said I need to see what's in here." Marshall stood. They were 3 feet apart. Colter had 70 pounds on him. The box dangled from Colter's left hand, combination lock swinging. "Deputy, that box is my mother's personal property. It contains her marriage certificate, my birth certificate, and a photograph of my father. It has no connection to the probate petition or the court's order. Removing it from this house without a warrant constitutes seizure without probable cause under the 4th Amendment." Colter held the box for 6 seconds. Marshall counted them. Then Colter dropped the box on the floor. It hit the hardwood with a crack that split the silence of the empty house like a rifle shot. "Oops," Colter said. Marshall picked up the box, opened it. The glass in his father's photograph had cracked, a diagonal line running from the upper left corner through the center of the young soldier's face. The marriage certificate was undamaged. The birth certificate was undamaged. He closed the box, set it gently on the bed, did not look at Colter. "Got what you need?" Colter asked. "I do." "Then let's go." Marshall walked toward the front door. As he passed the kitchen, he noticed something. The junk drawer, the one his mother kept rubber bands and dead batteries in, was open, not all the way, just enough to see that it had been rifled through, items displaced, the careful disorder of someone searching without wanting to appear to have searched. He didn't mention it, didn't slow down, but the observation filed itself alongside every other observation, a catalog of intrusions that was building toward a weight this county's power structure was not designed to hold. Back at the courthouse, Marshall surrendered the deed to Tessa. She photocopied it, logged the copy, and returned the original. Then paused. "Actually, the judge wants the original held in the court's custody, for safekeeping. Georgia Code Section Bonwi Bongach Noi Hai Gach Noi Hai. The deed remains with the property owner unless the court orders transfer through proper judicial process with due notice. No such order has been issued." Tessa held the deed for 3 seconds, then slid it back across the counter. "I'll let the judge know you declined." "I didn't decline. I cited the law." That evening at the Holiday Inn, Marshall made a phone call, not from his personal phone, from a prepaid device he'd purchased at a gas station in Covington 2 weeks earlier. 30 seconds. Timelines accelerating. They're moving on the property. Holloway filed a motion citing a fake rule. Voss introduced fraud allegations without notice. Colter escorted me to the house. Someone had already searched it. Diane Kimura's voice came through, flat, controlled. Copy. We have the wiretap from this morning. Voss called Holloway at 7:42 a.m. before the hearing. Quote, "The Odom property is clean. 2 acres, no liens. The old woman doesn't have family nearby to fight it." Holloway, "What if the son shows up?" Voss, "Then we do what we always do." End quote. Marshall closed his eyes. The old woman, his mother, reduced to a variable in a transaction, a line item, a target. "How many more?" he asked. 17 confirmed. We think there are more in Talmadge and Howell counties. Same pattern, different assessors, but connected. We're mapping the financial network now. And Magnolia Land Partners? Holloway is the registered agent. Wire transfers to CV Holdings, Voss's initials. $847,000 over 3 years. The forensic accountants are still working. Marshall hung up. Destroyed the prepaid phone, flushed the SIM card, went to bed, did not sleep. Wednesday, March 26th. Marshall did not go to the courthouse. He stayed at the hotel, reviewed case documents on his encrypted laptop, and ate a granola bar for lunch. At 2:15 p.m., there was a knock on his hotel room door. He checked the peephole. Deputy Colter, in uniform. Marshall opened the door. "Deputy?" Colter held out a folded document. "Summons. Trespass complaint filed against you by R. Dunlap. Also, notice of emergency hearing. Friday, March Haimui Tam, 9 a.m. Judge Voss will reconsider estate disposition." Marshall took the papers, read the trespass complaint while Colter stood in the doorway. The complaint alleged that Marshall Odom had been observed removing items from the residence at Motngin Motram Bamuitam Birch Lane in violation of the court's protective order on Tuesday, March Haimuilum, at approximately 3 p.m. Marshall had been at the courthouse at 3 p.m. on Tuesday, surrendering the deed to Tessa, in front of witnesses, on camera. "The complainant is R. Dunlap," Marshall said. "Address, Motngin Motram Bonmui Birch Lane." "That's right, your mother's neighbor." "Frank Dunlap is the county property assessor who reassessed my mother's property. R. Dunlap, his brother, presumably, lives next door and is now filing a trespass complaint timed to coincide with a motion to seize the property." Colter's sunglasses were on, despite the interior hallway lighting. "I just served the papers, Mr. Odom." "Understood." Marshall held the papers at his side. "For the record, I was at the Brecker County Courthouse at 3 p.m. on Tuesday, surrendering a document to the clerk's office. The court's own cameras and Tessa Ridley can confirm my location." He also had a gas station receipt from 2:17 p.m., a bottle of water purchased at the Chevron on Route Mui Bay, high miles from his mother's house. Time stamped. Camera verified. He kept every receipt, organized by date, in sequence, the habit of a man whose profession required proving where he was and when. Colter left without responding. Marshall closed the door, sat on the bed, picked up his notebook. March 26, 2:17 p.m. Trespass complaint served by Deputy Colter, filed by R. Dunlap, Motngin Motchum Bonmui Birch Lane, brother of Assessor Frank Dunlap. Alleges removal of items from property at Biezochiung a Haimuilam Tangba, a time when I was physically present at the courthouse. Alibi evidence. Courthouse cameras, clerk Tessa Ridley as witness. Chevron receipt Sobei Tambamod. Haijo Mui Bai Fuchiu, Haimui Haiyum to property. Complaint is fabricated. Emergency hearing scheduled Friday for estate disposition. Language consistent with forced sale preparation. He underlined the last 3 words. Then added, recommend accelerating federal timeline. Pattern complete. Evidence sufficient for indictment. Every additional day increases risk of property transfer. That evening, at 7:40 p.m., another knock on the hotel room door. Not Coulter this time. Marshall checked the peephole. Pierce Halloway. No briefcase. No portfolio. Just a man in a cashmere overcoat standing in the hallway of a Holiday Inn, which was itself a kind of statement. The contrast between his clothes and the environment communicating that he belonged to a different world and was lowering himself to visit this one. Marshall opened the door, but didn't step back. Filled the frame. "Mr. Odom, may I come in?" "No." Halloway blinked. The answer wasn't in his script. People invited their guardians ad litem inside. People offered water, coffee, cooperation. People who were fighting to keep their family homes didn't shut doors on the men who had the power to take them. "I want to help you," Halloway said. "That's what guardians ad litem do. We protect estates. My estate doesn't need protection. It needs to be left alone." Halloway adjusted his cuffs. Gold links. Monogrammed. P.H. The same initials on the leather portfolio. "Mr. Odom, I'm going to be candid with you. This process can go two ways. The easy way is we sit down, review the estate, agree on a fair assessment, and close the probate within 90 days. Your mother's house stays in the family. Everybody's happy. And the hard way? The hard way involves more hearings, more expenses, more time, and frankly, the court's patience has limits. Judge Voss takes a dim view of petitioners who obstruct the process. I haven't obstructed anything. I filed a petition. Your office lost it. I refiled. Your office charged me twice. I appeared for a hearing. It was canceled without notice. I appeared for a second hearing. The court appointed a guardian I didn't request, granted receivership without motion practice, and introduced fraud allegations without notice or affidavit. If anyone is obstructing this process, Mr. Halloway, it isn't me." Halloway's expression didn't change, but his eyes, the slight contraction of the muscles around them, the way they shifted half a degree to the left, told Marshall everything he needed to know. Halloway had not expected this. Not the words themselves. Anyone could rehearse indignation. But the delivery, the precision, the chronological accounting without notes, without hesitation, without a single emotional inflection. The delivery of a man who had been tracking every irregularity, not because he was angry, but because tracking irregularities was what he did for a living. "I'm trying to help you," Halloway said again. Quieter this time. "Then dismiss the receivership. Withdraw the GAL petition. Let the probate proceed under normal rules. If you're actually trying to help, those are the steps." Halloway straightened his overcoat, stepped back from the door. "I'll see you Friday, Mr. Odom." "You will." The door closed. Marshall stood behind it for 10 seconds, then walked to his notebook and documented the visit. Time, duration, content, Halloway's exact words about the hard way, including the monogrammed cufflinks, because details that seemed irrelevant now had a way of becoming evidence later. The phone call that night was briefer than the others. "Friday hearing," Marshall said. "They're going to try to order the sale." "Copy. How long can you hold?" "As long as necessary." "We're 3 weeks from grand jury. Can you buy that time without compromising the operation?" "If they don't arrest me first." Pause. "Is that a possibility?" Coulter planted a trespass complaint. Voss has 2 contempt findings on record. One more and she can order detention. She's building a file. "Marshall, if you're in physical danger..." "I'm in a courtroom in Georgia. Everything is on the record. Let them build the file. The bigger they make it, the more predicate acts we have." Kimura was quiet for 3 seconds. Then, "Understood. Friday. I'll have a team on standby in Macon, 90 minutes out." "Make it 60. He hung up. Destroyed the phone. Another SIM in the toilet. Friday, March 28th, 9 a.m. Marshall arrived at 8:25, parked front-facing, walked through the metal detector. Lunsford was at the courtroom door, standing with his arms crossed, and his legs spread wide enough to block the entire entrance. "Mr. Odom, arms up." "The metal detector is in the lobby. I've already cleared security." "Additional screening. New policy." "What's the policy number?" Lunsford stared at him. "I'm the policy." He patted Marshall down. Not a professional search, but a dominance ritual. Slow, hands lingering on the shoulders, the waist, the pockets. The kind of contact designed to communicate physical superiority without crossing the line into actionable assault. Almost. When Lunsford's hands reached Marshall's back pockets, he pushed hard, a two-handed shove that rocked Marshall forward onto the balls of his feet. Marshall caught his balance without touching the wall. His center of gravity shifted and recovered in a single motion, the kind of instinctive correction that comes from years of defensive training. "Stand still," Lunsford said, though Marshall hadn't moved except to avoid falling. "I'm standing still." "You leaned. You pushed me." Lunsford's face went red from the jawline upward. He grabbed Marshall's left wrist and twisted it behind his back, a compliance hold, the kind taught in every law enforcement academy in the country. Applied slowly, applied with the pressure of a man who wanted to see how far he could go before something broke. Marshall didn't resist. His wrist rotated in Lunsford's grip, going with the torque instead of against it, preventing the joint lock from fully engaging. Another trained movement, invisible to anyone watching from a distance, obvious to the man trying to control him. "Something you want to tell me?" Lunsford's mouth was close to Marshall's ear, close enough that Marshall could feel the heat of his breath. "I have a hearing at 9. Lunsford held the grip for 3 more seconds, then released, stepped back. Marshall rotated his wrist once, twice, checking the joint. No damage, the redness would fade in minutes, but the contact was documented, in Marshall's memory, which was the most dangerous filing system in this building. Lunsford's hands reached his briefcase. "Open it." Marshall opened the briefcase. Lunsford pawed through the contents: notebook, pen, legal documents, a granola bar, a water bottle. He held the notebook, flipped through pages. Lot of writing. "I take notes." Lunsford tossed the notebook back into the briefcase. It landed on the granola bar, bending the wrapper. Marshall straightened it without comment, closed the briefcase, and entered the courtroom. 9:07 a.m. Voss entered. The docket had been cleared. Only one case this morning, the Odom estate. Holloway was already seated at the respondent's table. He had a new stack of documents. Marshall noticed for the first time that Holloway's leather portfolio had a monogram. P.H. Beneath it, in smaller gold letters, Magnolia Land Partners. The name meant nothing to anyone in this courtroom. Not yet. "Mr. Odom," Voss began, "the court has received a trespass complaint from a neighboring property owner indicating you violated the court's protective order by removing items from the estate property on March 25th. Your Honor, I was at this courthouse at the time alleged in the complaint. I was surrendering a deed to the clerk's office. Your own security cameras will confirm my location. Do you have evidence of your whereabouts?" Marshall produced the gas station receipt. "Chevron station, Route Muy Bay, High Muy Bay, PM. High Muy High miles from the property. Time-stamped. Camera verified. I also have a copy of the clerk's log showing I surrendered the deed at approximately 2:45 p.m. Mr. Holloway, have you reviewed the complaint?" Holloway stood. "Your Honor, the complaint was filed in good faith by a concerned neighbor. Regardless of the merits of this specific allegation, it raises broader questions about the petitioner's respect for the court's authority." Marshall's grip on the podium didn't tighten. His breathing didn't quicken. But something behind his eyes shifted, the way a lens adjusts when the subject moves into sharper focus. "Your Honor, a fabricated complaint is not a broader question. It's a false report. Georgia Code section muy get noi hai muy sao makes filing a false police report a misdemeanor. The complainant, R. Dunlap, is the brother of the county assessor who reassessed this property, the same assessor whose valuation triggered the guardian ad litem appointment. These are not independent actors." The courtroom temperature dropped 2 degrees. Not literally, but the quality of silence changed. Voss's expression went through 3 micro-expressions in 2 seconds: surprise, calculation, decision. "Mr. Odom, you will not make accusations against officers of this court or members of this community without evidence." "I'm not making accusations. I'm stating documented facts. The assessor's name is Frank Dunlap. The complainant's name is R. Dunlap. Their addresses are Motngin Motrum Bonmui and Motngin Motrum Bamui Tam, Birch Lane, respectively. These are public records. Voss's hand came down on the bench. Not a gavel. Her open palm. The sound was sharp, percussive, a physical assertion of authority that made the court reporter flinch. That's enough, Mr. Odom. I am holding you in contempt of court. Second finding. You are remanded to the custody of this court until you demonstrate willingness to comply with court orders and cease making unfounded allegations. For the record, I request that the court reporter note the time of this contempt finding, 9:14 a.m., and the stated basis, my citation of publicly available property records connecting the trespass complainant to the county assessor. Bailiff, remove Mr. Odom. Lunsford moved fast. His hand found Marshall's upper arm, not the shoulder this time, but the arm itself, gripping the tricep with enough force to compress muscle against bone. Marshall's body responded before his mind could override it. A subtle weight shift, rotating his elbow inward to reduce joint pressure, distributing the force across a broader surface area. A trained movement, not resistance. Biomechanical self-protection, Lunsford felt it, the resistance that wasn't resistance. The competence hidden inside compliance. For half a second, his grip loosened, the involuntary response of a man who had just grabbed something that didn't react the way prey was supposed to react. Then he tightened his grip and pulled. Marshall moved with the pull, not against it. They walked toward the side door, past the bar, past Holloway, who was closing his portfolio with the careful satisfaction of a man watching a plan execute on schedule, past Tessa, who was already entering notes into her computer, the contempt finding logged before Marshall had left the room. At the door, Marshall spoke one more time, clearly, loudly enough for the court reporter, the gallery, and the security cameras, assuming they were working. Let the record reflect the bailiff has placed his hands on me without legal justification. The grip has left visible marks on my upper arm. I request this be documented. The record will reflect what I say it reflects, Voss said from the bench. The door closed behind him. The holding cells in the Brecker County courthouse were in the basement. 2 cells, separated by a concrete wall. Steel doors with food slots at the bottom. No windows. A single overhead light behind a wire cage that stayed on 24 hours a day. Marshall was placed in cell 1. His belongings were inventoried by Colter. Wallet, keys, phone, notebook, pen, briefcase. Colter took his time with the briefcase. Opened every pocket, unfolded every document. His hands moved through the contents with the thoroughness of someone looking for something specific, or planting something. Marshall watched Colter's hands, not his face, tracking what was being touched, what was being lingered over, what was being opened that shouldn't be opened. The inventory form listed wallet, keys, BA, phone, Samsung, notebook, pen, MOT, legal documents, Messi, briefcase. Marshall counted the items as Colter logged them. 7 items, Marshall said, plus the briefcase itself, 8 total. I can count. Then count the pen. It's not on the form. Colter looked at the form, looked at the pen. A fine point black Pilot G2, sitting on the counter next to Marshall's wallet. It wasn't listed. Oversight, Colter said, and added it. Marshall read the completed form. His eyes moved line by line, stopped on line 6. Item 6, prepaid phone, black, no case. I don't own a prepaid phone. Colter's face didn't change. It was in the briefcase, side pocket. My briefcase has been in my possession all morning. Lunsford searched it at the courtroom entrance at approximately 8:30. He did not find a prepaid phone, because there was no prepaid phone. Are you refusing to sign? I'm refusing to sign an inventory that lists an item I don't own. Signing would constitute acknowledgement of possession. I do not possess a prepaid phone and have never placed one in my briefcase. Colter slid the form across the counter. Sign or don't, makes no difference to me. Marshall didn't sign. Colter filed the form anyway, unsigned, with a notation that the detainee refused to acknowledge inventory. In the cell, Marshall sat on the steel bench. Didn't pace. Didn't call anyone immediately. Sat. Waited. Assessed. He removed his watch, a plain Timex with a cracked crystal, and placed it face up on the bench beside him. Checked it every 15 minutes. Exactly, not approximately. Every 15 minutes, his eyes moved to the watch face, noted the time, and returned to whatever point on the opposite wall he'd been examining. The habit of a man who had been in confined spaces before, who knew how to manage them, who understood that time in custody moved differently than time outside it, and that the best defense against disorientation was structure. At 10:15 a.m., approximately 1 hour after being placed in the cell, the food slot at the bottom of the door scraped open. No tray appeared. Instead, Lunsford's voice, distorted by the metal. "You hungry?" Marshall didn't answer. "I asked you a question." "I heard you." Silence. The slot stayed open. Then a sound, liquid hitting concrete. Lunsford had poured something through the slot. Water. Half a cup, maybe more. It pooled on the floor near Marshall's feet, creeping across the uneven surface toward the drain in the center of the cell. "Thought you might be thirsty." The slot closed. Marshall looked at the water on the floor, looked at his watch, wrote nothing. His notebook was in the property bag upstairs. But the time, the action, and the words filed themselves in the same mental architecture he used for every operational detail. 10:15 a.m. Lunsford. Water poured on cell floor. Verbal taunt. No food or water provided. At 10:30, the slot opened again. This time, Colter. "Phone call. You get one." Marshall stood. The cell door opened. Colter led him down the hallway to a wall-mounted phone, the kind with a steel cord and a receiver encased in a metal cage. Old. Analog. No privacy. Colter stood 6 feet away, leaning against the wall, making no pretense of giving Marshall space. Marshall dialed. The call lasted 18 seconds. "This is Marshall Odom. I'm being held in the Brecker County courthouse on 2 contempt findings. A prepaid phone was planted in my property during booking. The inventory is unsigned. Timeline's accelerating. They're moving on the property." He hung up, walked back to his cell, sat down, checked his watch. At 11:20 a.m., the cell door opened without warning. Lunsford filled the frame. Behind him, the hallway stretched toward the stairwell. Empty. No witnesses. "Stand up." Marshall stood. "Turn around. Hands on the wall." "On what basis?" "Security check. Random." There was nothing random about it. Marshall turned, placed his hands on the concrete wall. The surface was cold and slightly damp. He spread his feet shoulder-width apart without being told. The posture of compliance, demonstrated before it could be demanded, denying Lunsford the satisfaction of issuing the command. Lunsford patted him down for the second time in 3 hours. This search was rougher, harder. When his hands reached Marshall's ribcage, he pressed inward. Not a pat, but a squeeze. A compression of the intercostal muscles that sent a sharp spike of pain through Marshall's chest without leaving a mark. Marshall's breath caught. Half a second, then it steadied. "Something wrong?" Lunsford asked. "No." "You flinched." "I didn't." Lunsford squeezed again, harder. Marshall's vision narrowed for a moment, the involuntary response of a body processing sudden pain, then cleared. He kept his hands on the wall, kept his breathing controlled, did not move. "You know what your problem is?" Lunsford said, close enough that his voice seemed to come from inside Marshall's head. "You think because you can quote some statute, that makes you special. It doesn't. Statutes are words on paper. This—" He tapped the badge on his chest. The metallic sound was sharp in the enclosed space. "This is real. You understand the difference." Marshall said nothing. There was nothing to say that would improve his situation, and nothing to say that wouldn't make it worse. Silence was the only weapon that couldn't be turned against him. Lunsford released him, stepped back. "Turn around." Marshall turned, lowered his hands. His ribs ached. A deep, tissue-level pain that would bloom into a bruise by morning. He looked at Lunsford without expression. "We're done," Lunsford said. "For now." The cell door closed. The lock engaged. Marshall sat down, checked his watch, noted the time, 11:23 a.m. Duration of contact, approximately 3 minutes. Nature, unauthorized search, physical compression of ribcage, bilateral, verbal intimidation. He lifted his polo shirt. The skin over his ribs was red, 2 parallel marks where Lunsford's fingers had pressed. They would darken. They would be visible. And when the time came, they would be photographed, documented, and entered into evidence. Marshall lowered his shirt, leaned back against the wall, closed his eyes. This man is sitting in a cell right now, and nobody in this courthouse has any idea what they've just set in motion. If you want to see what happens when the walls close in on the wrong people, stay right here. Don't miss a second of part 2. Hours passed. The overhead light didn't change. No one brought food. No one checked on him. The holding cell had no clock, no radio, no reading material, just steel concrete and the wire-caged bulb that turned everything the same pale yellow. At approximately 1:30 p.m., Marshall's watch reading, he couldn't verify it against any other source, footsteps echoed in the basement hallway, 2 sets, one heavy, one lighter. The cell door opened. Colter stood outside, hand on his belt. Behind him, a woman Marshall didn't recognize, mid-40s, navy blazer, Georgia Bureau of Investigation badge on her belt. "Mr. Odom?" The woman's voice was professional, neutral. "I'm Agent Paulette Hines, GBI. I'm here regarding a federal matter." Colter's posture changed. The GBI had no jurisdictional relationship with the county sheriff. Different chain of command, different authority, different politics. A GBI agent showing up at a county holding cell was unusual. A GBI agent using the phrase federal matter in a county holding cell was a warning shot. Agent Hines. Marshall stood from the bench. Not quickly, not slowly. The way a person stands when they've been expecting this exact moment. "I'd like to speak privately." "Of course." Hines turned to Colter. "Deputy, I'll need the room." "He's in the custody of this court. You'd need to speak with Judge Voss." "Deputy, I don't need the judge's permission to speak with a citizen. I'm asking you to step outside. This is a state matter with federal implications." Colter hesitated. His hand moved on his belt, not toward his weapon, but toward his radio. The instinct to call for backup, to escalate to someone with more authority, to defer upward in the chain. Hines waited. She didn't repeat herself, didn't raise her voice, just stood in the doorway with the particular stillness of a law enforcement officer who had said what she was going to say and was now waiting for compliance. Colter stepped back. The door stayed open. Hines entered the cell. "Mr. Odom," she addressed him quietly. "No detainee, no sir." Just his name, spoken with a weight that didn't match the circumstances, the weight of someone who knew exactly who she was talking to and was calibrating every word accordingly. Marshall looked at her. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes, something that had been held in careful suspension for 3 weeks, shifted into a higher register. "How much time do we have?" he asked. "Enough." Hines glanced at the open door, lowered her voice further. "Kimura sent me. Your team intercepted the wiretap from this morning. Voss called Holloway at 7:42, before the hearing. The receivership motion was prepped before your contempt finding. They're not reacting to you, Marshall. They're running a playbook." "I know. Grand jury is 3 weeks out. Kimura wants to know if you can hold." "I can hold." "The planted phone complicates things. If they charge you—" "They won't charge me. Charging me means discovery. Discovery means I get access to their records. Voss is smart enough to know that. The phone is leverage, not evidence. She'll hold it over me to force a settlement on the property." Hines studied him. "You're running this from a holding cell." "I'm documenting predicate acts from a holding cell. There's a difference." She almost smiled. "Didn't." "I'll report back. Kimura has a team in Macon, 60 minutes out." "Tell her not yet. Every hour I'm in here, they commit more acts on the record. The contempt findings, the planted phone, the fabricated trespass complaint. Each one is a separate count. Let them build the file." Hines nodded, stood, walked to the door. "Mr. Odom," she said at the threshold, loud enough for Colter, who was standing 15 feet down the hallway, pretending not to listen, to hear. "We'll be in touch regarding the federal matter. In the meantime, your rights under the Constitution apply regardless of what any county judge says." She left. Her footsteps receded up the hallway. Colter followed, leaving Marshall alone in the cell with his watch and the wire-caged light. Upstairs, something was already changing. Marshall couldn't see it, but he could feel it. The way a man standing in a building feels a tremor before the walls show cracks. The GBI visit had registered. Tessa would tell Voss. Voss would call Holloway. Holloway would call whoever needed calling. The machine was still running, but now it knew something was watching. And in 47 minutes, Voss would make the first call that the FBI's Title BA wiretap would capture in real time. A call to Holloway, her voice controlled but faster than usual. Her words clipped with the particular cadence of a person who has just realized the ground beneath her might not be as solid as she thought. "Get the receivership motion filed today," she would say, "before close of business, and find out who sent the GBI." Holloway would ask, "Should we slow down?" And Voss would answer with 4 words that would appear in a federal indictment before the year was over. "We do what we always do." The cell door stayed locked. Marshall checked his watch. 12:47 p.m. He leaned back against the concrete wall. Closed his eyes. Not sleeping. Listening. Cataloging the sounds of a building that didn't know it was being dismantled from the inside. Somewhere above him, a phone was ringing. Somewhere in Macon, a federal team was checking their weapons, loading their vehicles, reviewing photographs of a courthouse they would enter within days, its exits, its holding cells, its camera blind spots, its single courtroom where a woman in a black robe had been running a property theft operation for the better part of a decade, and somewhere in a fireproof box under a bed on Birch Lane, a box with a cracked photograph of a soldier who never met his son, next to a marriage certificate and 40 years of property tax receipts. A deed to 2.3 acres of Georgia red clay sat in the dark. The deed to a house that Lorene Odom had paid for with 34 years of shelving library books, stamping due date cards, reading to children during story hour every Wednesday afternoon, and walking 2 miles each way to work because the bus route didn't reach Birch Lane until Mot Ngin Chin Trum Chin Mui Bay. Her son was going to keep that house. If he had to sit in this cell for another week, he would sit. If he had to let them plant another phone, file another complaint, fabricate another rule that existed nowhere except in Pierce Holloway's leather portfolio, he would let them. If he had to absorb every shove, every grip, every squeeze of Lunsford's hands against his ribs, he would absorb them. Document them, timestamp them, file them in the architecture of a case that was going to bring this courthouse down to its marble foundations, because Marshall Odom had made a promise to a dying woman. And Marshall Odom did not break promises. The lock on the cell door didn't click. Not yet. End of part 1. Judge sets up an innocent black man, unaware. He's the FBI chief on her case. Part 2. The fluorescent light behind the wire cage hadn't changed in 14 hours. Same frequency. Same pale yellow. Same low electrical hum that vibrated at the exact pitch designed to prevent sleep without being loud enough to constitute a complaint. Marshall knew the frequency, 60 Hertz, the standard for American alternating current, because knowing irrelevant details was how his brain managed the relevant ones. Categorize everything, file everything, let the architecture of observation replace the chaos of waiting. 14 hours, no food, no water except what Lunsford had poured on the floor, which had since dried into a faint mineral outline on the concrete. No blanket. The steel bench radiated cold upward through his clothes and into his bones with the steady patience of a system designed to erode resistance 1 degree at a time. Marshall checked his watch. 12:03 a.m. Saturday, March 29th. He had been in this cell for approximately 15 hours. The contempt finding that put him here cited no specific duration. Voss had said, until he demonstrates willingness to comply with court orders. Language vague enough to justify anything from 24 hours to indefinite detention. In practice, contempt detentions in Georgia rarely exceeded 72 hours without judicial review. In practice, Brecker County rarely followed practice. At 12:17 a.m., footsteps in the hallway. Not Lunsford. The cadence was wrong. Lighter, faster. Someone walking with purpose rather than weight. The food slot opened. A paper bag slid through, followed by a bottle of water. Then a voice. Female, young, unfamiliar. From the night desk, Sergeant Price said no meals after 6, but I figured you hadn't eaten. Marshall picked up the bag. Turkey sandwich on wheat. An apple. A packet of mustard. The bread was fresh. The apple wasn't bruised. Someone had brought this from outside the building. Thank you, he said to the slot. The slot closed. Footsteps retreated. He never saw her face. He ate the sandwich in the dark. The apple was a Honeycrisp, the kind his mother kept in a bowl on the kitchen counter, replaced every Tuesday after her grocery run. The taste hit him harder than anything Lunsford or Colter or Voss had done, not because it was painful, because it was kind. And kindness, in a place engineered to eliminate it, was the one thing his training hadn't prepared him to absorb without reaction. He finished the apple, drank the water, set the bottle next to his watch on the bench. Then he did what he'd been doing since 10 o'clock, when the building above him had gone quiet and the only sounds were the hum of the light and the distant clank of the courthouse's ancient heating system cycling on and off. He reviewed the evidence. Not physically. His notebook, his briefcase, his phone were all upstairs in the property room, logged on an inventory form he'd refused to sign because it listed a phone he didn't own. But Marshal Odom had spent 22 years building cases in his head before they existed on paper. The architecture was there. The rooms were furnished. He walked through them now, in the dark, on a steel bench, testing each wall for weaknesses. The property records first. Laureen Odom's home, Motngin Motrambamuitam Birch Lane, Brecker County, Georgia. Purchased September Muibon, Motngin Chincham Muibe, for $12,000 from Walter Crenshaw. Title search clean. Chain of ownership unbroken for 41 years. Property taxes current through January, Haingin Kongtrum Haimuibon. Then the reassessment, signed by County Assessor Frank Dunlap on January Tam, Haingin Kongtrum Haimuibon. Assessed value, $187,000. Previous assessment, dated January, Haingin Kongtrum Haimuihai, $94,000. A 99% increase in 2 years, nearly double, in a county where average property values had risen 11% over the same period. Dunlap had done this before. The FBI's forensic team had pulled assessment records for every property that passed through Voss's probate court in the last 8 years. 19 properties reassessed by Dunlap in the 12 months before probate proceedings began. All belonged to black landowners over the age of 65. All were reassessed at values significantly above market. Inflated numbers that triggered the unofficial threshold Voss cited for guardian ad litem appointments. A threshold that existed nowhere in Georgia statute. A threshold invented to justify the insertion of Pierce Halloway into proceedings where he had no business. And then the sales. 17 properties confirmed. All sold through court-ordered disposition, receivership, forced sale, estate liquidation. All purchased by the same entity, Magnolia Land Partners, LLC, registered agent, Pierce Halloway, business address, a P.O. Box in Macon, that also received mail for 3 other LLCs, 2 of which shared a Delaware incorporation agent with a trust called CV Holdings. CV Cordelia Voss. The wire transfers told the rest. $847,000 moved from Magnolia Land Partners to CV Holdings over 3 years. Not in large lump sums, those would trigger currency transaction reports. In careful, structured deposits, $9,000 at a time. Just under the $10,000 threshold that required banks to file CTRs with FinCEN. Textbook structuring. A federal crime on its own, separate from the underlying fraud. Marshall had the financial records, had the property records, had the assessment pattern, had Halloway's appointment orders, all dated before the petitions they purported to respond to were officially entered into the court system, had the wiretap, authorized under Title BA by the Chief Judge of the Northern District of Georgia, capturing Voss and Holloway coordinating in real time. And now he had something else. Something the case file didn't contain yet because it had happened in the last 24 hours, in a holding cell to his own body. 2 contempt findings issued without lawful basis. A fabricated trespass complaint filed by the assessor's brother. A prepaid phone planted in his briefcase during booking. A property inventory falsified to include an item he didn't own. Physical assault by a bailiff, documented by bruises currently darkening across his ribcage. Water poured on a cell floor. 14 hours without food or water provided by the facility, and a courtroom where the record reflected what the judge says it reflects, rather than what actually occurred. Each one was a predicate act. Each one expanded the scope of the federal indictment from property fraud to civil rights violations. Each one transformed Marshall from an investigator into a victim. And in federal racketeering law, a victim who is also a law enforcement officer elevates every charge by a sentencing multiplier that would keep Cordelia Voss awake at night if she knew it existed. She didn't know. Not yet. Marshall checked his watch. 12:41 a.m. He closed his eyes. Not to sleep. To organize. To walk through the rooms of the case one more time, checking locks, testing hinges, making sure every door opened when he needed it to and stayed shut when he didn't. 3 weeks to grand jury. 21 days. He could hold. Morning came without sunrise. The basement had no windows, and the fluorescent light created a permanent artificial noon that erased the difference between 3 a.m. and 3 p.m. Marshall measured time by his watch and by the sounds above him, the heating system cycling. Footsteps, the distant metallic complaint of the courthouse's front door opening and closing as Saturday staff arrived for the skeleton crew that handled weekend filings. At 8:12 a.m., the cell door opened. Colter. Judge wants to see you. On a Saturday? Judge works when the judge works. Colter gestured down the hallway. Let's go. They walked upstairs, through the basement corridor, up a narrow stairwell that smelled like mildew and floor wax, into the ground floor hallway where the Saturday morning light came through windows that needed cleaning. Marshall blinked. His eyes adjusted. The light hurt, not from brightness, but from the sheer sensory change after 15 hours of unchanging yellow. Colter didn't take him to the courtroom. He took him to a conference room on the second floor, a small room Marshall hadn't seen before, with a rectangular table, 4 chairs, and a window overlooking the parking lot. The room smelled like furniture polish and old paper. Law books lined one wall, their spines cracked and faded, more decorative than functional. Judge Cordelia Voss sat at the head of the table. No robe. Civilian clothes. A charcoal blazer over a white blouse, pearl earrings. The absence of the robe was calculated. This was not a judicial proceeding. This was a conversation. Off the record. No court reporter. No transcript. No cameras. Pierce Holloway sat to her right, portfolio closed, hands folded. The posture of a man who had been told to be present but not to speak unless spoken to. Colter positioned himself at the door, arms crossed, feet wide. Sit down, Mr. Odom. Voss gestured to the chair across from her. Her voice was different from the courtroom, quieter, conversational, almost warm, the voice of a woman who had decided to try a different approach. Marshall sat. His ribs ached when he bent forward. He didn't let it show. I want to resolve this, Voss said. I think we can. Marshall waited. The contempt findings can be vacated. The trespass complaint can be withdrawn. I'll speak to Mr. Dunlap personally. The receivership can be terminated. Your mother's estate can be probated within 60 days. Clean, simple, everything you came here for. Marshall looked at Holloway. Holloway didn't meet his eyes. In exchange for what? Voss opened a folder on the table. Inside, a single sheet of paper, a settlement agreement. Marshall could read it upside down, another skill that came from 22 years of sitting across tables from people who kept documents angled away from him. The settlement proposed that Marshall accept a fair market assessment of the property at $220,000 and grant the court authority to facilitate transfer to a qualified purchaser at that price. The purchaser was not named. The closing would be handled by Holloway's office. Proceeds, minus court costs, GAL fees, and administrative expenses, would be dispersed to Marshall within 90 days. Marshall did the math in his head. $220,000, minus Holloway's fees, typically 15%, minus court costs, variable, but Voss controlled the number, minus administrative expenses, a category broad enough to absorb whatever Voss wanted it to absorb. Net to Marshall, maybe $140,000, for a property worth at least $250,000 on the open market. And the buyer, unnamed, but certainly Magnolia Land Partners, would flip it within a year for $350,000 or more. They were offering him a discount on his own mother's house, paying him to give it away, and structuring the transaction so that everyone involved got their cut while the paperwork looked clean. This was what they always did. "Mr. Holloway," Marshall said, "your portfolio has a monogram, PH, and beneath it, Magnolia Land Partners. I noticed it Friday. Who is the unnamed purchaser in this agreement?" The room went still. Holloway's hands unfolded, refolded. The tell of a man whose carefully maintained composure had just been punctured by a detail he didn't think anyone would notice. "The purchaser hasn't been identified yet," Holloway said. "The agreement simply authorizes the court to facilitate a sale to a buyer your firm represents. Through an LLC, you serve as registered agent for, at a price determined by an assessor whose brother filed a false trespass complaint against me." Voss's warmth evaporated. The temperature in the room didn't change, but the quality of her attention did, from conciliatory to assessing. The look of a predator recalculating whether the animal in front of her was prey or something else. "Mr. Odom, I'm trying to help you." "You said that." "Mr. Holloway said it too, when he came to my hotel room Wednesday evening uninvited." "I was offering guidance," Holloway said. "You were delivering an ultimatum. The easy way, or the hard way. Your words." Voss looked at Holloway. Holloway looked at the table. "Mr. Odom," Voss said, and her voice had dropped to the register she used from the bench, the contralto that filled rooms without amplification. "You are in contempt of this court. You have a trespass complaint pending. A prepaid phone was found in your belongings, which raises questions about who you've been communicating with and why. You are a man with no attorney, no local connections, and no leverage. I am offering you a way out. I suggest you take it." Marshall looked at her, at the settlement agreement, at Holloway's closed portfolio with its gold monogram, at Colter, standing at the door, arms crossed, the physical architecture of a room designed to produce compliance. "No," Marshall said. One word. The same weight he'd given Colter's friendly advice. The same inflection he'd given Lunsford's compliance hold. The same flat, informational tone he'd used for every response in every interaction in this courthouse. The tone of a man who had decided what he was going to do before he walked into the room and was now simply communicating the decision. Voss's jaw tightened. "Then you'll remain in custody until Monday's hearing, at which point I will order the estate into immediate disposition." That would require a motion, a briefing period, and an evidentiary hearing. Georgia Uniform Probate Code section Nummoy Baget Noybegek Noymot. The petitioner, that's me, is entitled to 14 days' notice and an opportunity to present evidence. You can't order disposition from the bench on oral motion. I can do whatever I determine is necessary to protect the estate. With respect, Your Honor, you can do whatever the law authorizes, not more. Colter stepped forward. His hand landed on Marshall's shoulder. Heavy, firm, the grip of a man who had been given an unspoken signal. "Back to the cell," Colter said. Marshall stood. The shoulder grip tightened. Colter's thumb dug into the trapezius muscle, a pressure point technique that sent a sharp bolt of pain down Marshall's arm and into his fingertips. Marshall's hand spasmed once. He clenched it into a fist, not in anger, but to override the nerve response. They walked to the door. Marshall stopped, turned his head, not his body because Colter's grip prevented that, and looked at Voss. "For the record, since there is no record of this meeting, the bruises on my ribs are from your bailiff. The planted phone is from your deputy. and this settlement agreement is a confession in writing. I want you to know that I know. It doesn't change anything today, but it will." Voss's expression didn't change, but her hand, the one resting on the settlement agreement, trembled. Once, for less than a second. Then it stilled. Colter pulled Marshall into the hallway. The conference room door closed behind them. Back in the cell. Steel bench. Wire-caged light. Watch on the bench. 9:04 a.m. This is the moment where most people break. Where the pressure and the isolation and the power imbalance become too much, and they sign whatever's put in front of them. But Marshall Odom is not most people. And if you want to see what happens when a system built on corruption meets a man built on patience, share this story right now. Send it to someone who needs to hear it. Then stay right here. Saturday passed. Sunday passed. No visitors, no calls. Meals appeared twice daily through the food slot. Bologna sandwiches, apples, milk cartons that were warm by the time they reached him. Marshall ate everything. Hydration mattered. Caloric intake mattered. Pride did not factor into the equation. He used the hours to review, to refine, to walk through every room of the case until he could navigate it in the dark, which was functionally what he was doing. On Sunday evening at approximately 7:30 p.m., the food slot opened and a folded piece of paper slid through. No voice accompanied it. No footsteps announced who had delivered it. Marshall unfolded the paper. Handwritten, in careful block letters. Court reporter Brenda Sykes has preserved complete transcripts of all Odom hearings, including Friday. Judge Voss requested she alter the record. She refused. She is scared. Someone should know. No signature, no identification. The handwriting was deliberate. Block letters that could belong to anyone. The paper was standard courthouse stock, the kind available in every supply closet in the building. Marshall read it twice, folded it, placed it inside his shoe beneath the insole. The paper would wrinkle. The ink might smear. But the content, a court reporter refusing to alter an official transcript under judicial pressure, was the kind of detail that transformed a corruption case into an obstruction case. Obstruction carried separate charges, separate penalties, and most importantly, separate witnesses. Brenda Sykes. He'd noticed her at every hearing. Quiet, professional, fingers moving across the stenotype with the mechanical precision of someone who had been recording words for decades. She hadn't spoken to him, hadn't looked at him with anything other than professional neutrality, but she had preserved the record, and someone in this courthouse, someone with access to the holding area after hours, wanted him to know. Monday, March 31st, 9 a.m. Marshall was brought from the cell to the courtroom. 3 days in custody, unshaven, same clothes. The gray polo was wrinkled, stained at the collar with the accumulated grime of a steel bench and a concrete wall. He smelled like institutional soap and stale air. Voss intended this as theater, the uncooperative litigant, humbled. The man who wouldn't take the deal, diminished. The courtroom was fuller than Marshall had seen it. The couple from the first hearing was back. A woman with a notebook sat in the last row, press maybe, or a concerned citizen. Brenda Sykes was at the court reporter's station, fingers poised over the stenotype, face betraying nothing. Holloway sat at the respondent's table with yet another stack of documents, the emergency receivership motion, the disposition order, the apparatus of a property theft, assembled in duplicate, ready for judicial signature. Voss entered. Black robe, reading glasses. The transformation from Saturday's blazer back to the judicial uniform was complete. Whatever conciliation she'd attempted in the conference room had been replaced by the institutional authority of a woman who had been told no and did not intend to hear it again. "Mr. Odom, you've had the weekend to reconsider your position, have you?" "My position hasn't changed, Your Honor. I'm requesting that the contempt findings be vacated, the receivership terminated, and the probate petition processed under normal procedures." "Denied. Mr. Holloway, your motion." Holloway stood, opened his portfolio, began reading from the emergency disposition motion, a document that proposed the immediate court-ordered sale of Mot Ngin Motrum Ba Mui Tam Birch Lane to protect the estate from deterioration and waste. Marshall listened. Took no notes. His notebook was still in the property room. But his eyes moved to Brenda Sykes every 30 seconds, confirming that her fingers were moving, that the transcript was being created, that the record existed regardless of what Voss wanted it to say. Holloway finished. Voss turned to Marshall. Response? Your Honor, I object to the motion in its entirety. The property shows no evidence of deterioration or waste. Property taxes are current. The structure is maintained. The objection is based on... The courtroom door opened. Not the side door, the main door, the one the public used, the one that opened from the marble lobby into the rear of the gallery. The sound was wrong for a casual visitor. Too many footsteps, too evenly spaced, too purposeful. 4 people entered. 3 in dark suits, 1 in the khaki uniform of the United States Marshals Service. The woman leading the group was Japanese-American, early 50s, her hair pulled back in a severe bun that matched the severity of her expression. She carried a leather folder, not a portfolio, not a briefcase, but the specific kind of folder used to transport federal warrants. She walked down the center aisle with the deliberate pace of someone who had rehearsed this entrance, who knew exactly how many steps it took to reach the bar, and who intended every pair of eyes in the room to track her arrival. Lunsford moved to intercept. His hand came up, the same open palm he'd used on Marshall's chest 3 weeks ago. The woman didn't stop, didn't slow, didn't acknowledge the hand. She walked past it, the way a river walks past a stone. You can't, Lunsford started. The U.S. Marshal, a man whose shoulders seemed to strain the fabric of his uniform, stepped between Lunsford and the woman. He didn't speak, didn't need to. His badge was on his chest, his weapon was on his hip, and his presence communicated a hierarchy that Lunsford's courthouse authority could not override. Lunsford stepped back. His face went through 3 colors in 2 seconds, red, white, and a shade of gray that people display when the ground beneath them shifts in a direction they didn't know was possible. The woman reached the bar, addressed the bench. Your Honor, I'm Assistant Special Agent in Charge Diane Kimura, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Atlanta Field Office. I'm here to execute a federal search and seizure warrant issued by the Honorable Judge Raymond Alcott, United States District Court for the Northern District of Georgia. Case number 1:24-CR-00847. United States versus Cordelia Voss, et al. She opened the leather folder, removed the warrant, placed it on the bar rail. The courtroom was silent. Not the uncomfortable silence of Marshall's first hearing, the absolute silence of a room full of people who understood that something fundamental had just changed and were waiting to learn the shape of the change. Voss stared at the warrant, at Kimura, at the 2 FBI agents flanking her, at the U.S. Marshal who had neutralized Lunsford with nothing but posture. This is my courtroom. Voss's voice carried the same contralto, the same authority, the same everywhere quality. But underneath it, audible to anyone listening for it, was a frequency that hadn't been there before. Fear, not panic. Fear, the controlled fear of an intelligent person confronting a threat she had not anticipated and could not immediately assess. You have no jurisdiction here. Your Honor, Muitam USC section, Mot Ngin Tramnam Muimot, the Hobbs Act, provides federal jurisdiction over extortion under color of official right. Muitam USC section, Sao Trum Salmuisao, covers theft from programs receiving federal funds. Brecker County received $2.3 million in federal judicial administration grants last fiscal year. This court is within federal jurisdiction. Kimura's voice was level, precise, devoid of theater. She recited the statutes the way a surgeon names instruments, not for dramatic effect, but because precision was the difference between success and catastrophe. The warrant authorizes seizure of court records, financial documents, and electronic devices related to the case. My agents will begin execution immediately. She turned to the gallery. Her eyes found Marshall. Special Agent in Charge Odom, are you injured? The title detonated in the courtroom like a charge placed at the base of a load-bearing wall. Special. Agent. In charge. 3 words that rewrote every interaction that had occurred in this building over the past 27 days. Every shove, every squeeze, Every poured cup of water and planted phone, and fabricated complaint and lost filing and invented rule, and whispered threat and off-the-record meeting. Tessa Ridley's hands stopped moving above her keyboard. Her fingers hovered, suspended, as if the connection between her brain and her body had been severed by the sound of those 3 words. Lunsford took another step backward, then another. The retreat was involuntary, the physical response of a man whose body understood what his mind hadn't yet processed, that the person he had shoved, grabbed, squeezed, searched, and locked in a cell was the highest-ranking FBI agent in the state of Georgia. Holloway's pen dropped from his fingers. It rolled across the table and fell to the floor with a sound that was, in the silence, absurdly loud. Colter, at the back of the courtroom, reached for his radio, then stopped, lowered his hand. There was no one to call, no one who could help, no one in his chain of command who outranked the people now standing at the bar of this court. Marshall stood, not quickly, not dramatically, the way a man stands when he has been sitting on a steel bench for 3 days, and his ribs ache, and his clothes smell like concrete, and his body has been compressed and grabbed and twisted by people who thought they could do those things without consequence. "I'm fine," he said. "The evidence is intact." 5 words. The first confirmed his physical status. The second confirmed the operation. Together they communicated to Kimura, to the agents, to the U.S., Marshall, and to the stenotype machine recording every syllable that the 14-month investigation had survived 3 days of custodial abuse, evidence planting, and judicial corruption, and that every act committed against Marshall during that time was now part of the federal case file. Kimura nodded, turned to her agents. "Execute the warrant. Start with the clerk's office, then Chambers." The agents moved, one toward the clerk's station, where Tessa sat frozen, her coral fingernails motionless on the keyboard, the other toward the side door that led to judicial chambers, the room where Voss kept her files, her computer, her phone records, and whatever else 14 months of corruption had produced. Voss stood. Voss. The movement was sudden, the involuntary rise of a person whose authority has been challenged at such a fundamental level that sitting feels like surrender. Her robe billowed as she rose, the black fabric catching the courtroom's flat light. "I am calling my attorney. This proceeding is suspended. No one touches anything in my chambers without—" "Your Honor." The U.S. Marshal spoke for the first time. His voice was quiet, respectful, and carried the immovable weight of federal authority. "The warrant authorizes immediate seizure. Obstruction of a federal warrant is a separate offense under Moi Tom USC section Mut Ngin Num Trum Mui Chin. I'd recommend allowing the agents to proceed." Voss's hand found the edge of the bench, gripped it. Her knuckles went white. "I want my attorney," she said, quieter now. The contralto was gone. What remained was the voice of a woman who had spent 16 years controlling every outcome in this room and was now confronting the first outcome she could not control. "You're entitled to counsel at any time," Kimura said. "The warrant execution will proceed regardless." Voss sat down, slowly. The robe settled around her like a shroud. Marshall walked to the bar. Kimura handed him a clean shirt from a bag one of the agents carried. A white Oxford, pressed, his size. He'd told her the details 3 weeks ago, when they'd planned for the possibility that he'd be in custody when the warrant was executed. Preparation was the difference between an operation and an improvisation. He changed in the hallway. The gray polo went into an evidence bag. Bureau protocol required preservation of clothing worn during documented assaults. The bruises on his ribs were visible when he lifted the shirt, 2 parallel darkened lines running across his left side where Lunsford's fingers had compressed the intercostal muscles. An agent photographed them, time-stamped, case-tagged. BK get noi hai, hom hai bon get noi, hom tam bon bay get noi, PH. O get noi, hom bon bon. When Marshall returned to the courtroom, he was wearing the Oxford and carrying his briefcase, retrieved from the property room where Colter had stored it with the falsified inventory. The prepaid phone that Colter had planted was now in a separate evidence bag, tagged and logged by FBI technical staff. The inventory form, unsigned, listing the phone as Marshall's property, was in a third bag. Holloway was still seated at the respondent's table. His portfolio was closed. His hands were folded. His face had achieved a quality of stillness that Marshall recognized from decades of interrogation experience, the stillness of a person who is calculating whether cooperation or silence offers the better outcome. "Mr. Holloway," Kimura stood in front of the respondent's table. "You serve as registered agent for Magnolia Land Partners, LLC. Is that correct?" Holloway looked at the table. "I'd like to speak with an attorney." "That's your right. You should know that the warrant includes seizure of all Magnolia Land Partners financial records held in this courthouse or associated with your role as guardian ad litem. If you have personal devices containing relevant communications, we'll need those as well." Holloway reached into his jacket pocket, produced a phone, set it on the table like a man laying down a weapon. "I want to cooperate," he said. His voice had changed, stripped of the smooth authority he'd used in hearings, in hotel hallway confrontations, in Saturday conference rooms. What remained was smaller, thinner, the voice of a man who had been running a calculation in his head since the moment he heard special agent in charge, and had arrived at the answer every defense attorney fears. The evidence was overwhelming, and the only variable left was the severity of the sentence. "Cooperation is noted," Kimura said. "We'll discuss specifics with your counsel present." 2 agents escorted Holloway from the courtroom, not in handcuffs. He wasn't under arrest. Not yet. But the escort communicated a transition from participant to subject that was visible to everyone watching. Colter was next. An agent approached him at the back of the courtroom. "Deputy Colter, we have surveillance footage from an FBI-operated camera in the courthouse parking lot. The footage, recorded on March 28th at 11:47 a.m., shows you removing a prepaid phone from your patrol vehicle and placing it in the property bag belonging to Marshall Odom during booking. The footage was downloaded from a bureau vehicle, logged by technical agent Sandra Fong, and assigned case evidence tag BK Gatnoi Hai Không Hai, Bon Gatnoi Không Tam Bon Bay Gatnoi, VID Gatnoi Không Ba Mot." Colter's face went blank. Not the practiced blankness of Tessa Ridley. The genuine blankness of a man whose mind had just collided with a fact that demolished every assumption he'd been operating under. He had planted the phone in a building he believed was unwatched by anyone who mattered. He had been wrong. "I want my union representative," Colter said. "You're entitled to representation. In the meantime, you're relieved of duty pending investigation. Your badge and service weapon, please." Colter unclipped his badge, unholstered his weapon, placed both on the nearest bench. His hands were steady, professional discipline holding against the internal collapse, but his jaw was clenched hard enough to make the muscles in his temples visibly pulse. He walked out of the courtroom, through the gallery, past the woman with the notebook in the last row, who was writing quickly, past the couple from the real estate dispute, who sat in stunned silence. Through the lobby, the metal detector, the front door, into a parking lot where his cruiser sat, next to 3 black Bureau SUVs that hadn't been there when he'd arrived that morning. Lunsford was detained separately. The FBI's case file documented a pattern. His body camera had malfunctioned during 7 prior incidents involving black litigants in Voss's courtroom. 7 incidents, 7 failures. The statistical probability of 7 consecutive technical failures occurring exclusively during interactions with one demographic was, according to the Bureau's Forensic Technology Unit, functionally 0. The court reporter's transcript, preserved intact by Brenda Sykes, despite Voss's request that she review and correct it, documented Marshall's verbal objections during the Friday hearing, including his statement about the bailiff's hands and his request that the time be noted. The transcript matched the security camera footage from the courtroom's single operational camera, the one Voss apparently didn't know was connected to the county's central server, which the FBI had accessed under a separate warrant 3 months ago. Marshall stood at the prosecution table, the table where, in normal proceedings, the state's attorney would sit. He wasn't presenting evidence, wasn't making arguments. He was watching. His hands rested on the table, relaxed, the hands of a man who had been holding tension in them for 27 days and was now, gradually, allowing it to release. Kimura approached him, spoke quietly. DOJ Civil Rights Division completed their statistical analysis last week. Brecker County, Tallmadge County, Howell County. Combined data. Black property owners were 11.4 times more likely to have guardian ad litem appointments in probate, 7.2 times more likely to face contempt findings, lost property at 14 times the rate of white property owners in the same courts. The analysis covers 8 years of records. 3 counties, Marshall said. Voss only sits in Brecker. That's the open thread. Tallmadge and Howell have their own judges. Same pattern, different names on the bench, but the financial trail connects them. Magnolia Land Partners purchased properties in all 3 counties, and there's a second, LLC, we haven't traced yet. Piedmont Heritage Trust. You know about it? It's in the wire transfer records. Magnolia sends money to CV Holdings. CV Holdings sends money to Piedmont. Piedmont is incorporated in Delaware. Ownership shielded. The subpoena for Delaware corporate records is pending. Could take months. Marshall nodded. Months. The legal system's timeline for addressing a theft operation that had been running for years. Justice moved slowly because it was designed to move slowly. The same deliberative process that protected the innocent also protected the guilty, and the difference was measured in patience. Voss remained on the bench for 47 minutes after the warrant was served. She made 2 phone calls, one to her attorney, Marcus Webb of Macon, and one to a number that the Bureau's real-time wiretap identified as belonging to a cell phone registered to a man named Gerald Pettis. Pettis was not a lawyer. He was a real estate developer based in Augusta, and his name appeared nowhere in the current case file. A new thread, an unexpected one. Webb arrived at 10:15 a.m. He was 62, white-haired, and dressed in a suit that cost more than Marshall's monthly car payment. He conferred with Voss in chambers for 12 minutes, then emerged and addressed Kimura. My client invokes her Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination and will not be providing statements at this time. She reserves all rights under the Constitution and under Georgia judicial immunity statutes. Understood, Kimura said. The Georgia Judicial Qualifications Commission has been notified. Judge Voss is suspended from the bench effective immediately, pending investigation. The suspension order was signed this morning by the JQC chair. Webb nodded. He'd expected this. The JQC referral was standard procedure when a sitting judge became the subject of a federal investigation, not punishment, but preservation. Keeping Voss on the bench while federal agents searched her chambers would have been an institutional absurdity that even Georgia's judicial establishment couldn't tolerate. Voss emerged from chambers. No robe now. She'd removed it for the last time, hanging it on the hook behind her chamber door where it had hung for 16 years. She wore the charcoal blazer from Saturday, the pearl earrings, the reading glasses on their chain. She walked through the courtroom without looking at Marshall, without looking at Tessa or Lunsford, or the empty chair where Holloway had been sitting. Through the gallery, through the lobby. At the front door she stopped. The woman with the notebook in the last row had followed her out. Judge Voss, Carly Whitfield, Macon Telegraph. Can you comment on the FBI investigation? Voss looked at the reporter, then at the parking lot, then at the sky. Overcast, March gray, the kind of sky that promises nothing and delivers less. No comment, she said. She walked to her car, a silver Lexus, parked in the space marked Reserved. Judge. She drove out of the lot without looking back. If you've made it this far, you already know this story isn't over. The investigation is just beginning. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because the people behind this aren't all in one courtroom, and the next name on the list might surprise everyone, including the FBI. The aftermath unfolded over weeks, not days, weeks. The federal legal system does not operate on the timeline of drama. It operates on the timeline of paperwork, grand jury schedules, plea negotiations, and the grinding procedural machinery that transforms evidence into indictments and indictments into consequences. 1 week after the warrant execution, the Brecker County Courthouse reopened under a visiting judge assigned by the Georgia Supreme Court, a retired jurist from Savannah named Eleanor Pratt, who drove 4 hours each way and was known for finishing proceedings on time and tolerating nothing. The Odom estate probate was resolved in 11 minutes. Judge Pratt reviewed the petition, the will, the title search, and the death certificate. She vacated the receivership, dismissed Halloway's appointment, vacated both contempt findings, confirmed Marshall as executor. Mr. Odom, is there anything else before the court? No, Your Honor, thank you. The estate is yours. I'm sorry for your loss, and I'm sorry for what this court put you through. She paused, looked at the bench. Voss's bench, now temporarily hers. Courts are supposed to protect people. This one failed. It was the closest anyone with judicial authority had come to acknowledging what had happened. Marshall nodded, picked up his briefcase, walked out of the courtroom for the last time. The consequences rolled out like dominoes tipped in slow motion. Lunsford was terminated by the county. The excessive force documentation, bruise photographs, transcript records, body cam malfunction pattern, left the county attorney no viable defense. His union filed a grievance. The grievance would take 18 months to resolve. In the meantime, Lunsford was unemployed, uninsured, and facing a potential federal civil rights referral under Muy Tam USC section, Hai Trum Bon Muy Hai for the physical assaults on Marshall. Maximum sentence if convicted, 10 years. Colter was placed on administrative leave with pay. The sheriff, a political ally of Voss, opened an internal review of the evidence planting, but the review's independence was questionable given the sheriff's office had provided Colter's assignments and knew about his courthouse duties. The FBI referred the matter directly to the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia, bypassing the local chain entirely. Colter's union lawyer advised him to cooperate. He was considering it. Halloway's Georgia State Bar license was suspended pending an ethics investigation. The investigation would take 6 to 12 months. The bar moved even slower than the federal courts. Magnolia Land Partners' assets were frozen by federal court order, 14 bank accounts, 7 real estate holdings, and the P.O. box in Macon. Halloway himself was cooperating with the FBI. His attorney had negotiated a proffer session in which Halloway would provide testimony about the property scheme in exchange for potential sentencing consideration. No deal had been finalized. Deals like this took months. Tessa Ridley was placed on administrative leave by the county. Her role in manipulating filing dates. The 7-day gap between Marshall's first filing and its system entry, the duplicate fees, the lost petition, was documented in the federal case file. She told investigators she was following instructions, whose instructions she declined to specify. The phrase hung in the air like an unanswered question that would define the next phase of the investigation. Voss was suspended with pay by the Judicial Qualifications Commission. Not arrested, not charged, not indicted, not yet. The federal grand jury was still deliberating, reviewing 14 months of evidence, wiretap transcripts, financial records, and the testimony of 2 former clerks and 1 retired deputy who had agreed to cooperate under separate agreements. The indictment, when it came, would be sealed. Marshall wouldn't know the specific charges until the seal was lifted. But he knew the architecture. Hobbs Act extortion, federal program fraud, conspiracy, structuring of financial transactions, and obstruction of justice. The obstruction charge was new, added after the investigation uncovered Voss's attempt to alter the court reporter's transcript. Brenda Sykes had provided a sworn statement, but the case was not complete. 2 threads remained open, loose, unresolved, the kind of threads that kept investigators awake and defense attorneys employed. The first, the email, obtained through federal subpoena during the early phase of the investigation. Dated February 28, 6 days before Lorene Odom died.
6 days before there was an estate to probate.
From Brecker.County.gov. 2. Subject: Odom property. 2 acres, clean title, no encumbrances. The sender's identity was shielded behind the county's email server, which the FBI had been unable to fully access due to an ongoing dispute with the county's IT contractor about the scope of the federal warrant. Someone inside the county government had flagged Lorene Odom's property before she was dead. Someone had identified it as a target while she was still alive. That person had not been named, had not been identified,
had not appeared in any testimony, any wiretap, any financial record. They were still out there, still inside the system, still unnamed. The second thread was larger, more troubling.
Magnolia Land Partners' financial records showed transfers not only to CV Holdings, Voss's trust, but to a second entity, Piedmont Heritage Trust, registered in Delaware. Ownership shielded behind a corporate structure that required separate legal action to penetrate. The FBI's subpoena to the Delaware Division of Corporations had been filed. The response was pending. Could take weeks, could take months. What the Bureau already knew, Piedmont Heritage Trust had purchased properties in Talmadge and Howell counties, the two adjacent jurisdictions where the DOJ's statistical analysis had found the same pattern of discriminatory probate outcomes. Different judges, same results, same demographic targeting, same financial beneficiary. If Piedmont connected to judges in those counties, the case expanded from a single corrupt judge to a multi-county judicial conspiracy. The kind of case that attracted DOJ attention at the highest levels. The kind of case that generated consent decrees and federal monitors and congressional hearings, and the kind of reform that looked transformative in press releases and modest in practice. Marshal Odom knew all of this. He knew it because it was his case, his investigation, his 14 months of wiretaps and financial subpoenas and pattern analysis, and the specific accumulating weight of evidence that would eventually, months or years from now, produce accountability. Partial accountability, the kind the system allowed. The system, on a Tuesday evening in April, 3 weeks after the warrant execution, Marshall drove to Birch Lane, not in the rental. He'd returned that to the Hertz in Decatur, in his own car, the one he drove to work every morning at the Russell Federal Building, the one with the FBI parking pass on the dashboard and the encrypted laptop in the trunk. He parked in the driveway, his mother's driveway, walked to the porch, sat on the swing. The garden was overgrown. Lorene hadn't been able to tend it in her last months. The congestive heart failure had taken her mobility before it took her life. The rose bushes needed pruning. The herb garden was wild with mint that had escaped its borders. The porch swing's chain needed oiling. It creaked with each motion, a sound that Marshall associated with every evening of his childhood, with his mother reading aloud while he pretended to do homework and actually listened to her voice. He opened the fireproof box. It was on the porch now. He'd retrieved it from under the bed and brought it outside because the evening light was better and because some things deserved to be looked at in natural light. The glass in his father's photograph was still cracked. The diagonal line ran from the upper left corner through the center of the young soldier's face. A fracture created by Deputy Colter dropping the box on the hardwood floor and saying oops, with the casual cruelty of a man who understood that some damage was too small to prosecute and too personal to forget. Marshall held the photograph, looked at the man he'd never met. The army dress uniform, the serious expression, the young eyes that didn't know they had 3 months left. He set the photograph on the swing beside him, pulled out his notebook, the same leather notebook with the numbered pages that had been in his briefcase through 27 days of courthouse warfare. He opened it to the last written page. Case BK Getch Noi Hai Kong Hai Bon Gek Noi Hum Tam Bon Bai. Phase 1 complete. Phase 2, unknown duration. He added one line. Mom's house is safe. Closed the notebook, sat on the swing, let it creak. The sun was going down over Birch Lane, the same sun that had gone down over this property 11,000 times since Lorene Odom had signed the deed and carried the first box through the front door. A woman alone, 23 years old, 3 months pregnant, with a dead husband's army pension and a library science degree, and the specific, unshakable determination of someone who had decided that this piece of ground was hers and would remain hers for as long as she drew breath. It was hers. It was his. It would stay. But 3 weeks later, a manila envelope arrived at the FBI Atlanta field office. No return address. Standard postal marking, processed through the Talmadge County Post Office, 70 miles east of Brecker County. Inside, a single page, handwritten. Careful block letters, the same handwriting, Marshall noted immediately, as the note that had been slid under his cell door. 9 property addresses in Talmadge County, each followed by a date, each followed by a set of initials. The initials did not match Cordelia Voss. They matched someone else. Someone whose name was not yet in the case file. Someone who was still sitting behind a bench, still wearing a black robe, still controlling outcomes in a courtroom that had not yet been visited by the FBI. Marshall read the list twice, folded it, placed it in an evidence bag, sealed the bag, logged it. Then he picked up the phone and called Diane Kimura. "We have a second judge," he said. The line was quiet for 3 seconds. "Same pattern?" "Same handwriting on the tip, same block letters. Whoever sent me the note about the court reporter is also sending me this. Someone inside the system is helping us. Or setting us up. Maybe. Either way, 9 addresses, 9 families, 9 properties." Another pause. Longer this time. "I'll brief the director," Kimura said. "This just became a task force case." Marshall hung up, looked at the evidence bag on his desk. 9 addresses. 9 families who had lost their homes through the same machinery that had tried to take his mother's. Phase 2 had begun. The duration was unknown. The hunt was not.